Appium Prime Cuts. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. If you have joined the presentation listening to your computer speaker system by default and you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the question pane of your control panel. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's session. I would now like to introduce Dan Cuellar, creator of Appium and Principal Development Manager at FOODIt. Dan?
Good evening and good morning and good night for everyone who's around. My name is Dan, and I'll be hosting today's webinar on Appium called Prime Cuts. And this evening, or this morning, I'm in London, so I say this evening, we're going to delve into some more advanced topics in Appium. And so hopefully there's a lot of things that you may not have seen before or that you wanted to see. And then at the end, we're going to have a lot of Q&A, so prepare all the questions you'd like. I'll do my best to answer them. And with that being said, I'd like to first off thank Sauce Labs for sponsoring webinars constantly. This is my second one I've done, and I really enjoy doing this. So thanks a lot to them for sponsoring this and making this available to the community. And thank you all for attending. There appears to be maybe 400. There it is, 400 of you here. So I'm very flattered by that, and hopefully we still have 400 an hour from now. We'll see. I'll do my best. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Cuellar. I'm the creator of Appium. I currently work at a food company in London called FOODIt. We make restaurant technology, so tablet apps to use in the restaurant, online ordering, all that sort of stuff. Before then, I managed the QA organization at Shazam, which is an app you may have used, music identification app, an augmented reality app if you're paying attention these days. And then before that, I worked at a dating site in San Francisco called Zoosk. And way back in the day, I worked on products you may know and love from Microsoft, such as Outlook and Excel and other things. And way, way, way long time ago, I went to school and got a computer science degree in Pittsburgh. But let's not talk about that. I'm here to talk about Appium. And so today we're going to cover a lot of things, but three main things. The first being we're going to talk about desktop app support in detail. I'm going to show you some demos. I'll even do a live demo of one for you. And this is the point when I'd like to advertise, if you like this webinar and you want to learn even more about desktop apps, boy, do I have something that will excite you. At Selenium Conf in Austin in 3 weeks, Joseph Durr, our Stuart Russell, and I will be giving a three-man presentation on everything you want to know about desktop support in Appium. So you'll have the product manager for Microsoft, you'll have the implementers of the Mac version, all there on stage to answer all your questions and show you everything that can be done. But I'm going to give you a little taste today of that. We're also going to talk about the new GUI, and I'm going to give you a demo of that and what it can do. It's quite impressive. So all those bugs entered on the appium.app. Finally, there's a working GUI for everyone, including Linux users, that works with Android, it works with iOS, and it works on the Mac and on Windows and on Linux. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that. And then we're just going to have a grab bag of all sorts of things I thought would be fun to talk about. And at the end, I'll take all of your questions, and we'll come up with a lot more things we can talk about, and I'll do my best to talk about them. So let's get started with the first thing I mentioned, which is the desktop. You may notice Lucifer's a bit cold here. This is a day I really never thought would come, but I'm very excited it has. Ever since Appium started, we kind of thought about this. Jason and I thought we called it automation for apps, and we really meant it. We meant like all the apps, right? Selenium is automation for websites. Appium is automation for apps. And for the first few years of the project, that largely meant only mobile phone apps or websites on mobile phones. But the day has come where it finally means any kind of app. So first off, I'd like to talk about the WinAppDriver project from Microsoft. I'm going to play a demo for you, and hopefully the sound comes through, but it doesn't really matter if it doesn't. I can sort of like, Discovery Channel it for you and sort of tell you what you're looking at. Because it's quite remarkable, but I want to give a big thumbs up, props, raise the roof, whatever, towards Microsoft for doing this, because this is the first vendor-supplied implementation for Appium, and it's for the Windows platform. So as you know, Microsoft no longer has the Windows mobile platform. They now have a Windows Universal platform, which is for phones and desktop apps. And with that, they include Appium support. So if you write any kind of application for any of Microsoft's platforms, you can use Appium to automate anything you'd like. The support is not completely finished, but it's quite comprehensive at this point. There's still work to do, but as I'll show you, it covers universal Windows platform apps, covers Win32 applications, Windows Presentation Foundation apps, Windows Form apps. Some of these combinations support web views, and you can even do Office and Outlook plugins. So that's the level of support they have put into WinAppDriver for you to automate Windows apps with Appium, which I think is quite remarkable for 1 year or so of work on this. So anyways, as I mentioned, oh, and also, some things I've been told might be coming soon. So don't quote me on the last one, but pen and touch support we hopefully will demo at SeleniumConf in Austin. Mobile phone support, and of course, it supports Windows apps, but the old Windows Phone 7 stuff, I think, is what they meant by that on the roadmap. And then lastly, Xbox allegedly is sort of flirting around with this, and I wish I had that demo for you today, but that doesn't exist yet. But it could possibly be coming by the end of the year or something like that. But don't quote me on that as well. So as I mentioned earlier, pigs are flying, hell is frozen over. I'm about to show you a video, and for those of you who are older like me, you may find this a bit jarring. It's kind of like the time I saw Sonic on Nintendo. It was just a weird experience all around. But I'm about to show you a video of a product manager from Microsoft using Bash on Windows to run a Java and Python script to open source programming languages, automation script for the Windows Calculator app. So I worked at Microsoft. When I worked there, we had a very different open source policy than they appear to have now. Clearly, I think things have turned in the right direction, but I still find this quite shocking that we're about to see all this open source software working with Windows. So I'm going to go ahead and start the video and stop making jokes about this. But here is an example of WinAppDriver in action automating the Calculator app with Appium.
How you can use various languages to write your test. You really can use whatever language you prefer. Here we have Bash on Windows up, and we're going to use the Linux Python to run a test written in Python to test the Inbox Calculator app in Windows. We can look at the test. You can see it's in Python. It has the app ID for the Inbox Calculator, and it's pointing at our Appium server. So Appium really is an incredibly flexible framework, and this is a great example of that. Here's another example of Appium's flexibility. Here's IntelliJ running a test written in Java using JUnit, and we're going to test the Inbox Windows Calculator. Another great example of how, with Appium, you really can use the language that you prefer, the test runner you prefer, to test your Windows apps.
All right. So if you weren't impressed by that, there is more. I was quite impressed by that. There's also Mac support, and the story behind this goes, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I released a project in the Appium group on GitHub, which was a proof of concept of how one could potentially write automation for Mac desktop apps. And I wrote it, and it got maybe 10 stars or something. It didn't have Appium has closer to 5,000, so obviously nowhere near as popular. But I knew a few people that were playing around with it, but I really thought that I'd just sort of thrown it out there and it had just disappeared and no one had ever used it. And I wouldn't come to many years later find out that actually no, a couple of people actually had taken it and run with it. And one of those people worked at Intuit in San Jose, I think. And they used they automated the entire QuickBooks suite along with a lot of other Quicken apps for Mac using this. And over the course of the last few years, they had made several significant improvements to the framework And they finally contributed those back about 3 or 4 months ago. And so Stuart Russell of Intuit was one of the lead engineers on that project, and he's going to be at Selenium Conf. Buy your tickets, folk. And we're going to go into great detail about this, but I'm going to give you sort of a quick survey of what we have for Appium for Mac. So currently it's run separately from Appium. I might get it integrated by the conference, but it's not. I have a lot of things to do right now. It's not a lot of work. And right now you just have to run a separate executable. It's not a big deal. It supports OS X 10.7 and higher, so I believe that's 7 or 8 years worth of Mac OS, so hopefully none of you have customers that are on anything older than 10.7. Given the leaks that went out to the CIA or from the CIA this week, you might want to upgrade that, unless you want to be sort of a listening post for my government. But anyways, we do support older things in case there are environments where people have older computers, and you have to support them. Also, it supports detailed mouse actions, native DOM, and it does not currently support web views, but I have been told it is possible. The work just wasn't fully completed and it hasn't been kicked back to the project. So if someone wanted to pick up that torch, that would be great. It's definitely achievable. It just hasn't been done yet. So just sort of a brief overview of how it works. All you need to do is set the platform to be Mac in your capabilities object. It does support implicit timeouts just like Selenium. We've introduced this parameter called loop delay, which is basically the interval between the polling. So whenever you run something like check for element to exist, there's a polling loop that occurs. This is just that interval between the polling. Also, there's the move mouse speed, and so it ranges from 0 to 100. 50 is sort of normal. 100 is lightning fast. It just depends how fast you want to run. I'll give you a demo later, and you can see kind of what that looks like. We also have some diagnostics output we can give you, and there's a capability for where you'd like that to be stored. And also, one thing I wish other Appium and other Selenium drivers would do is that they would put screenshot on error just built into Appium or Selenium, but on Appium for Mac we have it, which is great. On other ones you usually install it as like a Jasmine plugin or something like that, or there's JUnit plugins and that kind of thing. But anyways, we have it just built in capability. Pretty cool. So what does it look like? The .get, instead of a URL, you give it the path to an application or just the name. It's pretty smart. It can figure it out. Apple did all that work. We just leverage it. You can find elements using XPath. Only the DOM looks like that. You can inspect it with the accessibility inspector that comes with OS X. I may show you that later, I may not. Yeah, it's not that exciting, and I don't know what that would look like on a demo. Also, click is click, much similar to the web. .text is text, and so on. We have a reasonably complete implementation of the things you'd want to do. Not everything's there, but we have maybe 30 or 40 of these 70 or 80 methods in the protocol done, I believe. So I guess now is the time when I'll sort of go to my desktop and I'll just take it for a spin in front of you guys. So you can run this demo yourselves if you wish. So what you need to do is download the Appium for Mac source code and just build it in Xcode. So yeah, we'll get something nicer for you guys in 3 weeks when we actually sort of have the coming out party for this. So I already have it built. You'll see that it comes down here in my dock. There it is. So it's running. You can see it's listening on port 4622. So now I'll open up my terminal and I will run a test script. So we have, I'll make this a little bigger so you guys can probably see it. Make the font bigger too, can I? Yeah, there we go. All right. So examples. So this one is called calculator. It's a very simple script. It's just basic Selenium. This one's written in Python. Nothing terribly exciting. You can see those capabilities I talked about earlier here. We get the calculator app. We're going to switch to the first window. This is just a method to help us find what the name of the element is. You can see what the locators look like with XPath here. So we're latching onto the description that's set in accessibility. So we find a button with that description. And then you're going to see we're just going to perform some calculations. And we're using actually the action chains. So we have, as I said, a fairly good set of the API implemented, so we do support complex actions, which you use for the mouse. And then at the end, you're going to see it's just going to run some calculations. So this code is checked in. It's in the Appium for Mac repo. I'm just going to run it for you guys. So what you're about to see is the calculator app come up and do some calculations for you, all being run with WebDriver. So there's the calculator app. it's going to use native mouse events. You can use synthetic ones if you'd like it to be a little faster, but this one's actually going to move our mouse. And there you have it. That is a very simple script for the calculator. And for the purpose of this talk, since this is sort of a do everything in 30, 40 minutes kind of thing, I'm going to leave it there and say if you want to know more, check out the Selenium conference talk from Austin that Joseph, Stuart, and I will give, which is, I believe, on the 5th of April. And even better, if you want to see it in person, buy a ticket and come out to Austin. It's a lovely place. Anyways, I'm from Texas. I'll say that it's a nice place. So I'm going to go ahead and quit that, and I'll go ahead and close that. And let's get back to our slides. So that was a really quick demo of Appium for Mac. Feel free to take it for a spin, do whatever you want with it. Stuart has put some really good tips in the README for how to make your scripts fast. One thing you'll find with Appium for Mac is that if you don't know what you're doing, you can have code that takes a while to execute. Fortunately, Stuart has provided you all the information you need to know what you're doing in the README for that project, and then you will not have slow scripts. Another thing I'd like to show today, which is sort of still in beta, but it's nearing the point where it's going to be released fully fledged, is the new Appium GUI. So, as some of you may know, there were GUIs in the past. They haven't been maintained for many years. I wrote both of them, and then other people sort of took on the maintenance at one point, and then they sort of stopped and no one picked it up. And they've sort of become not well used and in disrepair. But no longer. Some people, a guy by the name of Dan Graham, I believe he's in the Vancouver office, or he works in Vancouver. He and some other people have put together an Appium desktop app, and I will show you what it looks like. So let's kill that. So here it is in the dock. It's this guy. It runs on Linux. It comes for Windows. It has an installer for Windows. It has a DMG for Mac, so it's really easy to install. Nothing crazy like before. You just download it and it works. It's bouncing a bit. Don't know why. There we go. Maybe it'll show up. There it is. So here's our new one. So has settings very similar to the old one, but we're just starting a basic server here. And you'll see here it is. It's running. So if we were to connect to it from somewhere else, we would see the log output here. But I'm just going to start a session from within the GUI. And here you'll see it here. So you have many options. We have the automatic server, but if you wanted to kick up something on Sauce Labs, you could, and use some sort of weird Android device you don't have on hand, or test object as well, and hopefully maybe some other people here soon later. So I have a iOS demo, so you can save your capabilities or you can code them here. So you could type the app name and whatever, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use the saved one and start a session. This is going to launch the test app we use for Appium, which is another app I wrote a long, long time ago that has been rewritten by other people, and it has a lot more stuff in it now. But anyways, wait for the slow iOS simulator, as we have to do nowadays. There's a slide later on how you might be able to improve the speed of this. It sort of is what comes with the latest iOS SDK and whatnot, but if you're using an older one, there's some tricks you can do to make it a little faster. But sorry about the slowness. Yell at Apple. Maybe they'll fix it. But there's not much we can do from the Appium project side. There's a good talk from the last Selenium conference in London by a guy from Facebook whose name escapes me, where he goes into the reasons of sort of why it's slow and how Facebook works around it. So you can see here's the new inspector. Just like the old one, you can click on and see all the information about the different pieces of the UI, and you can test things out. So if we want to test out, I bet I'll crash it here because I don't think this works yet, but maybe let's see. I'll try and send some keys. Yeah, I think I was pushing my luck there. Oh, no, it wasn't. Good. I underestimated that. Let's do one more. Fine. And we'll try a tap as well. So, no recorder yet, probably never. But you can see, it's just like what you're used to with all the functionality you're used to seeing. So it's really nice work, and I'm glad that they did this because this is something like I felt has been missing for the last 2 years that I was hoping would get resurrected by someone, and they have. So kudos to Dan and the other people that work on this. It's really, really nice. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. So for now, I'm just going to quit and close this out and stop the server and close that. And maybe we'll leave this open so it doesn't take so long to boot next time. So that's the new Appium GUI. Not quite done yet, but it looks pretty usable to me. So if you want to give it a whirl, check out the Appium Desktop project. It's Appium-Desktop on GitHub. It's under the Appium group on GitHub. So yeah, just more high-res screenshots of what you just saw. Really nice formatted logging output. Really nice inspector. Anyways, now we're sort of into the grab bag point of the evening or the morning. We're just going to talk about a bunch of random things. So I thought I'd start with how to get hooks into your iOS automation. So this is something I hear a lot of complaints about, like how do I make the app easy to automate? Because XPath can be slow or it can be difficult to work with or unreliable or whatever. And it's generally not the best way to do it anyway. So there are ways to add accessibility into the app so that you can make it really easy to automate. So Apple has sort of three main fields around accessibility, and these are what they are. So there's one called the accessibility identifier, which is not viewable to anyone except the automation. This is the one you want to be using. There's also accessibility label, which you may see recommendations about. You shouldn't use this because users with assistive devices like screen readers will actually hear this in place of the element. So when someone with a screen reader gets over your element, they'll hear the label you put. So it may not be translated in their language. It may not be something you want them to hear. But in general, you shouldn't use this because this is there to sort of tell the screen reader what is this. And the same sort of applies for the hint. The hint is there to provide more context when just a label is not sufficient. So usually it's sort of like a sentence saying this is what it does. So click this button to join whatever or something like that, just to give a little more help to someone using it with an assistive device. So anyways, that's what these three things are. And there's actually three ways to apply these things as well, which makes it even more confusing. So method one is you can apply it straight in your Zib or Nib or storyboard. You can just check the box for accessibility enabled, and you can fill in the label, hint, or identifier if you're doing it correctly. So as you can see, you put it there, and then it will show up in your app most of the time. There's some sort of weird quirks around certain kinds of UI. Don't implement the UI accessible protocol in Objective-C or Swift, but in general, that's how you do it 90+% of the time. Sometimes, though, that may not work, and you may not also have a storyboard because your UI is being built sort of programmatically. And in that case, there's just setters and getters, and you can use them. So since there's the Objective-C code to set the accessibility identifier, there's the Swift code, pretty straightforward. This works just as well, and this is like the most sledgehammer sort of method. Since this runs at runtime, this is going to override anything that may be set anywhere else. So if you really, really want to set it and make sure it's something, you can do it this way. The least recommended way to do it would be this third way. There's this idea of runtime attributes on elements in the UI, and it's just a dictionary, and so if you happen to set one with the key that and a string and a value, that will work too. The only time when this is really useful is for things that don't necessarily have the things you need in the UI to set this. There are a few things like, I believe, capsules and tab bars and things like that that aren't necessarily accessible, but you can sort of get it to work this way by injecting the stuff in there. So don't do this unless you really have to, but it's there and it works. So before I talk about Android, I'll just give you a quick demo of me doing this. Before I talk about Android, I'll give you a quick demo of me doing this in Xcode, and I'll sort of show you how it works. So let's open the test app source code. And let's take a look at the zip file, which is the interface file, the interface builder file. Wait for it to load. And here you'll see is the interface for the test app I showed you earlier. So on this element, I've defined a user-defined runtime attribute of accessibility identifier with a string. I'll just say runtime attribute, just so we know where it comes from. Good. On this one, I have defined an accessibility label here. perhaps I should actually do an identifier. So I'll say this is a accessibility identifier. And for this, I've actually defined it here as well. But I'll go ahead and remove that one, and we'll do that one in the code. So this won't have anything. And I'll go here to our view controller, and I will find that button, which is the compute sum button. And we will set one on it called compute sum button. So now I will build my app, and I conveniently left Appium all set up to launch this over here. So if I start a new session with my saved capabilities object that I used earlier, it's going to launch the app. Oh, there we go. I didn't click it. There we go. So it's going to launch that app I just built. I set this up to link to the one in the derived data folder in Xcode. So it's the one I just built now that it's going to launch in Appium. And we should see, once we get to the simulator, we should see in the inspector those things we put in. So here we see under the name runtime attribute, that's the one I put in the dictionary. Here's accessibility identifier, the one that I put in the accessibility section. And lastly, here's compute sum, the one I set programmatically. I could do a further demo where I show you the order of precedence, right, and how you override them and that sort of thing. But you sort of get the idea. That's the 3 different ways to do it. Some other fun things, if you want to use the hint field for like something, sometimes you might need to give some additional data, like some secret value or something. Well, I've seen that put in the hint field. That's okay. Just depends what you want to do. So anyway, that's it for that. So that is how you make an iOS app accessible. For Android, it doesn't need a demo because it's really straightforward. I don't know why it isn't as straightforward for Apple, but it actually is. If you read their like 400-page accessibility guide, it all makes sense. But if you don't, then look at these 3 slides and you'll be just as well off. So for Android, quite similar. Just in the layout builder in Android Studio, you can set the ID property, or you can just set it in the XML if you're so inclined. And that's the one you should use, the ID. Don't use the content description like we used to recommend, because that is like the accessibility label that is read with screen readers. So people who do use assistive devices will hear it. If you don't care about those people, then use it and it will still work. But try and care about those people because they need working software too. But if you're a startup, I suppose V2, not MVP or whatever they say. Anyway, so troubleshooting, there's a little bit more to the iOS. I'll come back to it because 3 slides wasn't enough. Actually, I needed a 4th one. Sometimes you'll do this stuff and it won't work. And there's some other things that you need to look at. So there's this idea of is accessibility element. And there was a checkbox. I don't have Xcode open, but there was a checkbox above where I set the label in the identifier that says accessible. So sometimes that's not set for certain elements, like grouping views and things like that aren't really something the user would think about, or things that are invisible or something like that. So you can set it on things like that. There's other things where you think it would be set and it isn't. So you may need to set that. Another one you may need to set is accessibility elements hidden, which you can force an element to hide all of its children from the accessibility layer, which means then Appium won't know that they exist. So some elements do this for one reason or another, but you can override it in the code programmatically by just setting this to false, and then they won't be hidden. I always like these negative property names because then it's really confusing when you set them whatever. Anyway, and then lastly, you may need to, if you have some custom UI, you may need to make sure that you implement the UI element, the UI accessibility protocol. So just make sure that you add that on. And if you're missing anything, the compiler will tell you that you're missing it, and you can add it in. So hopefully that covers how to make iOS user interface accessible. So I think this is simple that if you have sort of production devs, if you have like SDETs or STs or something like that, or SETs or whatever, all the weird names for people that write mainly test code and automation, I think this is something that they should be able to do and will help themselves out from writing very, very long, very, very brittle XPath expressions. So I'd recommend that you all try this out, have a go at it. It'll make your life better. Cool. So changing gears completely. This is a cool trick I've learned from some people over in Portugal. So another common question we get is, what do you do with WhatsApp notifications and SMS alerts And there's a nifty trick in iOS, and you can do the same thing in Android. I just demoed it here in iOS. You can set the notification to appear as an alert, and then Appium can process alerts using the Alerts APIs. So I'll show you how to do it here as a video. You go into your notification settings, and you pick the app you want to look at, so in this case text messages, so messages, and then you change the notification type to alert. You'll get a modal whenever you get like an unlock code or whatever it happens you need from the text messaging app, and you can just read the value from the Alerts APIs that we have already. So nifty trick, bailed a lot of people out. I'm just trying to share it with people so that more people can be bailed out by it. Great. Another thing I'll go over very quickly is the idea of context. So this is something that can be quite confusing to people coming over from Selenium because the idea doesn't really exist in Selenium. Selenium has the idea of windows and frames and that sort of thing, but not quite contexts. So I'll explain context briefly, and hopefully this slide illustrates it a bit. The idea is that in Appium you have different automation contexts. So Appium itself handles the native layer of the application. So here we're looking at Safari for iOS 6, I want to say. And all the stuff that I've highlighted with the purple arrows is part of the native DOM. It's sort of in the Cocoa layer, right? And that's what Appium deals with. But Appium also has this idea of context. So Appium itself doesn't automate web content per se, but Appium knows how to send Selenium inside the Webview automation code for that content. So each Webview is listed as a separate context. So in this case, there's two contexts. There's the native one, and there's the Webview. If you have multiple Webviews, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 contexts. But inside there, you just treat it just like it's a web page, and you use CSS selectors, or you use IDs, or whatever you want to use to automate it. All your Selenium commands work. You can even do things that you can't do from the app, like set the URL and all sorts of other fun stuff. So what Appium does under the hood is it just, when you try and automate that sort of thing, it just sends those commands, it proxies them to a Selenium server running against that WebView, which is either WebKit or it's going to be Chrome driver one. So anyways, just thought I would explain that. Hopefully that helps. So the slow iOS simulator problem. If you're using older versions of iOS, we had a thing called Instruments Without Delay, written by some people over at Facebook that would speed it up. And there were initial implementations written by the Appium team, but the good one was written by Facebook. I won't show you the one I wrote. You can install that manually now. Used to, we shipped it with Appium, which is why people may think, oh, why is it slow now? But due to the way that Apple changed the way that iOS apps are built, they put in some more sandboxing. We're no longer able to build it because we need the developer certificates for the person using the automation, which obviously we don't have the entire world's development certificates. We're not the CIA, right? So you have to build it and install it now. So I've put a link in there to where you can find the instructions on how to do that. For iOS 10 and up, it just takes a bit longer to boot. The workaround is sort of warm them up in advance. There's a good talk from Selenium Conference in London this year on what Facebook does, and they sort of have an algorithm for how they do this. So I'd recommend checking that out. It's the talk given by the Facebook guy at Selenium Conference. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, it's escaping me right now. I can remember his face. I can't put a name to it. Anyway, so some other stuff I'd go over is just some sort of one-off capabilities that people may or may not know about in iOS and Android. So we have the auto WebView capability, which I believe actually doesn't. I think this may not work with the latest version of iOS, but if you're using older ones, it does. And what this does is it automatically sets you into the first WebView context. So what this is really useful for is things like PhoneGap and Cordova apps, where it's just a WebView with an iOS shell around it. Then you don't have to worry about the whole idea of context. You can just start in the Selenium context and write your web automation straight away. For Android, we have this one called Ignore Unimportant Views. This can greatly speed up your Android testing. What this does is it removes a lot of the views in Android's UI hierarchy that solely exist for the purpose of grouping and theoretical correctness and those sorts of things. So when you don't have those in there, your DOM hierarchy becomes like 1/3 as deep. And as a computer scientist, I would tell you, the less deep the tree, the quicker it is to do things to it. So that can be done by adding that capability. It may change your XPath expressions a bit, but it really shouldn't, because if you ever looked at the views, they're just sort of like, they just sort of serve no purpose other than to like some kind of logical proof kind of thing. I don't understand why they're there really, other than correctness of some kind. There's also the native web screenshot capability, which will take the screenshot from, it will take it from the operating system instead of from the browser. So when you're using Chrome driver and you're in a web context, if you take a screenshot, it sends that screenshot command to Selenium. Selenium can't see anything outside the Webview, so you get a different screenshot than you would if you were taking it from the phone. So if you use the native web screenshot capability, when you take a web screenshot inside a Webview, or outside a Webview, you will get the whole Chrome of the phone and everything. So on Android, you'll see all the buttons and whatnot with it. That can be useful, and it's definitely more accurate to what the person's actually seeing using the device. For iOS, you can pre-authorize location services with that one, so you don't get that app would like to use your location. You can also auto-accept and dismiss all alerts. This may not exactly be implemented in the latest version of iOS because I don't believe Apple supports this, but in older ones you're able to do this. Native web tap will send all tapping commands through the native layer on Appium. So you'll do a tap at coordinates where the element on the website you're visiting exists on the page. This can be useful if you have handlers that live outside of the web code. So often there will be things that intercept things before they even get to the web view in the code. I'm trying to think of a good example, but there may be like a close button over a web view. And so if you try and click it from inside the web view, it'll just send it straight to the web page. But if you, that's actually not a good example, but there are things where this is useful. So if you're having any trouble tapping the right things when you're writing web automation, try the native tap and it will go all the way through the operating system. And if you have any handlers above the web layer, they will fire, and that will be hopefully help you automate what you need to. If you don't properly implement SSL on your test environments, which most of us don't, Safari is kind enough to throw up a fraud warning, which breaks a lot of automation. You can tell Appium to ignore that by setting this capability. So the web uses HTTPS more and more. TLS is getting very popular because of various reasons. But a lot of people don't have it on their test environment, so they just sort of set it up with a self-signed cert or with no cert at all, and that causes problems when you're using a phone. So use this capability to work around that. You might find it useful. And then there's also some around the keyboard, so you can adjust the time between the keystrokes, and you can adjust the strategy by which Appium sends the keys on iOS. You can send them one at a time, you can send them as words, or you can just bypass the keyboard altogether and set the value directly on the UI element. So if you want to run really fast, that third option is good. If you want something more realistic, the first option is good. If you want something sort of in between, there's that middle option. I leave it up to you to use them responsibly. Network conditioning is only available on Android, but you can toggle airplane mode, Wi-Fi only, data only, and everything on. So there's this method called set network connection, and it takes an integer value. It's like an enum. This is sort of a table of the values you can give it. But yes, we do support some level of network sort of simulation, kind of. But full-on proxy server and throttling and all that stuff is outside the scope of the Appium project. But we do give you the ability to tell the Android device, I want to turn on this, I want to turn on that, that kind of thing. Really useful, especially for real devices too. Cool. Another thing I will talk about is XPath. And I get a lot of questions about why is my XPath so slow, what's going wrong with it. And I'll explain to you why XPath is slow, and it has to do with the way we wrote the code for it. So the way we implemented XPath was we wanted to get the maximum correctness without doing a whole lot of work. So initially, in the first versions of Appium, we tried to implement the XPath protocol sort of real time, looking at the DOM. And that became tricky because XPath is a protocol designed for searching XML documents. It's not a protocol designed for finding UI, though Selenium sort of repurposed it for that, and now I think more people think of it for that than the other. So the way we've actually implemented it is whenever you do an XPath search inside Appium, we build an XML document that represents the entire UI DOM of the app, and then we search that. And when we build the UI, we leave sort of little breadcrumbs in there so that when we find out what in the document matches your query, we're able to then tie that back to the UI. We sort of kind of stamp the UI, and then we go back and we find all the stamps that we found, kind of thing. So this takes forever because we actually have to look at every element in the UI to build this document to then search it. So that is why it is really slow. Maybe someday we'll do the work and we'll fully implement a fast version of XPath the right way and not do it this way. We tried to do that initially, and we had so many bugs that it was consuming so much time. I went and I coded approach like this, and it's since been recoded by other people. So this way, XPath is 100% accurate. It's just a little slower. But you can work around that if you're smart. So you can do sub-searches on elements that you find with better identifiers like IDs and CSS selectors and other things like that. So there you're not building as big a tree. You're not starting from the root. You're starting from a smaller place, and thus it will run a bit faster. So that's sort of the reason why XPath may be slow for you, and that's sort of a way to work around it. Another thing I'll call out is implicit timeout is sort of a two-edged sword. If you use it correctly, it can save you a lot of glue code for waiting for things to appear and all that sort of thing. But the downside is whenever you want to do a negative check and you have that set, you always have to wait the implicit timeout to understand that the thing's not there. So there's two ways to get around this. One is just to not use implicit timeout and code in your waits for everything that you know is going to happen, which is one approach. The other approach is just simply to use the find elements, plural, version of the find commands. And when you do that, it'll return you an array. That doesn't wait for the implicit timeout. So then if you want to do a negative check and say, does this element exist or not, or does it not exist, you just take the count of the array and say, is it greater than 0? And then you've effectively done the same thing. You're not waiting for the implicit timeout anymore, though, so it's a lot faster. So I've seen a lot of code written where people do these negative checks and they have implicit timeouts of like 30 seconds because their site might be really slow or something like that. So you can wait 30 seconds for every negative check, which can really slow you down. So also don't set your implicit timeout that high, by the way. But anyways, that's a way to work around it. I already sort of covered this. So yeah, that is the 45 minutes, I guess, worth of stuff I put on tap for today. And then I've reserved the second part of this webinar to just talk about anything you'd like me to talk about. So please send in your questions. And I believe Bill of Sauce Labs will be on the line to sort of pick some and send them my way.
Hey, thanks, Dan. We sure do have quite a few questions. So I know we've got some blog posts in our future. First, I did want to say, I texted this to everyone, but the presenter at Selenium Conference London that you were trying to think of is Lawrence Lomax. And I put in the chat window a link to the YouTube video of his presentation. So we'll go ahead and make sure to send that out as well. But first off, Alexi says this presentation is awesome, so thank you so much for doing that. Let me try a few questions for you here. One of them here from Chris is, can Appium be used to test content validation on the mobile app?
Okay. I'm not entirely certain what that question is asking, but I'll take a stab at it. You can use Appium to validate that content displays correctly on the mobile app. When I worked at Zeus, we wrote an Appium script that would load the website in every language and take screenshots, and then we'd send it to some people that actually spoke those languages. And then they would say, oh, this is not grammatically correct, or oh, this overflow. We could actually find the overflows programmatically. I don't exactly remember how we did it, but it's possible with Appium to find out if an element's overflowing. But they would also look and say, oh, this content is the correct content for this market, and this currency has the correct decimal separator and that sort of thing. So yes, it can be used. The way it's usually done, I think you automate your scripts to walk through the parts of the content that you want to then screenshot. You dump those screenshots to a folder or something, and then you send them sort of over to people who look at them. That's how I've seen it done, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we get a follow-up. In the meantime, from Andre is, what's the best approach to assure that a test can use the same locators either for iOS or an Android app?
The best approach is to set IDs on everything, and then you can make them the same. But just keep in mind that if you want to use the same for both, your user interface has to be identical from that conceptual level on both of them. So if you have something that shows up using the Android back button on one, there is no back button on iOS, and thus you won't be able to do that. But as long as they are identical, you know, component for component. They don't have to look alike, but as long as they are component for component, that should work fine. I guess, and then one other tip for that would be to abstract your tests out into a way that you automate the page object model, and then you make the page object model share a common interface, and then you can write your test, and if one does need to hit the Android back button and the other needs to swipe left or whatever the Apple phone would want to go back, then you can abstract that out and use the same for both.
Very good, thank you. We did have a lot of questions around Appium Desktop, and one of them, I'm sure we can send in a follow-up is, but where can I download this new Appium GUI?
Oh, all right. So if you go to github/appium/appium-desktop, and then go to the releases section, you'll see all of the downloadables there for you. And so there's one for your platform. There's a I think there's an MSI, there's a DMG, MSI for Windows, a DMG for Mac, and there's like an app image or something for Linux. So they're all there, ready to check out.
Got it. Okay.
And for Appium for Mac, you have to build it from source using Xcode at the moment. So hopefully we'll sort that out by Austin.
Yeah. Okay. Here's one. Is there any way to compute the code coverage of our app through Appium?
Is there any way to compute the code coverage of your app, or Appium? For iOS, I'm pretty sure no. I could be wrong on that. I actually don't know the answer, but I don't know of a way. I shouldn't say I'm pretty sure it's no. I don't know of a way. I do believe the XUI test framework does include the ability to do code coverage. I just don't know if the people at WebDriver Agent have hooked that into it. But I haven't seen anything. I know we used to have some code coverage capabilities for Android sitting around, and I know it's possible for Android. For iOS, I'm not sure. For Android, I believe we support Jupcoco. There used to be capabilities for it. I'd have to look at the documentation, but there's no reason it shouldn't be possible. But I've never done it. I'm not an expert on it. So I'm sorry. I should just not answer that and forget everything I just said. I don't know.
All right. Very good. Here is one that I think the answer is certainly, but can Appium automate hybrid apps in Android?
Yes, Android. When I spoke about context earlier, contexts occur inside hybrid apps. So the example I showed was just a web browser, which isn't like a real hybrid app. But all of your web content is done in web context, and then if you need to touch anything in the native layer, it's in the native context. So to answer your question, certainly Appium can automate hybrid applications on Android and iOS.
Okay. And this is, well, no. Are there any examples on GitHub how to use Appium on Webview in Android? I hope I captured that correctly.
I would have to look, but I believe there are examples in the sample code repository of how to do that. If not, there's certainly integration tests for that, I believe, in the Appium project as well. So not exactly sample code. But the gist is you run the set context command in your language bindings, and then from there on you just write Selenium automation. So you just talk through it like you would a web browser until you set the context back to the native layer.
We had several related questions, although this is a little bit more broad, but where is the best place to download, see demos, and get support questions on Appium? Would it be the appium.io site, maybe the Appium forum? Where would you point people who have more questions about Appium?
We have a Slack channel, but I guess I would start with the discussion board. It's fairly comprehensive. It's appium.io/discuss, I believe, or just find the link on appium.io. So those are sort of three different tasks there. So if you want to ask questions, use the discussion group or the Slack channel. The Slack channel is invitation only, but we accept everybody. Trying to ask on the forum how to join the Slack channel, and then someone will set it up. It's complicated because of the way Slack wants to lock in your channel to like all email addresses on a specific domain, and so someone over at the Appium project has to add your email address to a list, and then you can get in it. We don't turn anyone down. You'll definitely be allowed to join, But ask on the forum to join, and someone will help you out. And for sample code, we have a repo called Appium/sample code. It needs an update, but it should be pretty good for Android, I would say. For iOS, it needs a big update. So you can check that out. It's just github.com/appium/sample-code. And there's examples in every language. There's even, I think, Windows examples for C# if you want to learn WinAppDriver.
Okay. We have a question here. The Appium Desktop, can Appium Desktop automate Java applications?
So Appium Desktop is the new user interface for Appium. But so I guess the answer is that we don't have anything that automates Linux applications at the moment. It's definitely doable. I would love it. That's sort of the last thing missing, I guess, if we've got Mac and Windows and we got iOS and Android, and I guess we could do Linux. It's got to be doable. If not, it's open source. We can make it doable. But yeah, currently there's nothing anywhere about having Linux at all. But I would love to see it.
Got it. All right. I think this question relates to, again, your reference to Lawrence's presentation. But what is warming up iOS simulator meant to speed up tests?
I'll have to refer you to the presentation, as I won't be able to do it justice. But Facebook has a lab of devices. They like have they have a system by which they sort of warm up simulators and then assign them to tests. I'm not going to do it justice, so I will just refer you to watch his. He has like a 40-minute presentation from Selenium Conference in London. Take a look at it. He spends about 10 minutes talking about how Facebook warms up simulators, and he sort of gives some advice on how they did it. And actually, probably just email him too. I don't have his email, but I think it's in that. It's definitely in that video. I'm sure he'd be happy to help you do that.
All right, and we'll include a link in that in the email that we send out to everyone who's asked. Yes, we will be sending out an email afterwards with a link to the recording of the webinar and Dan's slides, and we'll throw in a couple of extra links there too. So we're coming near to the conclusion of today's event, and I will see if I can ask a question that isn't too terribly detailed, but is there any way to test an iOS app without Apple ID or profile, etc., just as a pure tester via Appium?
All right. I want to say yes, but I'm not. You definitely need Xcode. I don't think you need all that other stuff if you're just using the simulator. And you can now, thanks to the WebDriver agent product, you can work on apps outside of. You guys can still see my screen, right? I can sort of show you this. Well, I'll just answer it and say, I think so. I'd have to, that's sort of a edge question. They're free to get, so you don't have to pay anything to get an Apple ID. So I don't know what the motivation would be to do it without it. But I think you can as long as you're only using the simulator. You definitely can't do it with a real phone. But yeah, it's free to get an Apple ID, so I wouldn't let that stop you. It's not free to get an Xcode developer account, which you need for, well, I don't know if you need it for real devices, but it is free to get an Apple ID.
Okay. Well, you've been very generous with your time today, Dan. Let me throw a good one that I know you and other contributors will appreciate. But Thomas writes, how can I be more involved with contributing to Appium?
That's a great question. So we have a roadmap. Maybe I will pull it up real quick, and you can sort of see what's coming next. We also have sort of open planning meetings, which I've never attended like I should. But you can actually get involved that way. So it's the Appium roadmap. It's out there. There it is. It's on the GitHub project. And you can take a look at it, and you can see sort of what's coming up. So the new GUIs is currently we're currently working on it. Android NuGet we're working on as well. These are some upcoming things. The planning meetings, I think they're every 2 weeks. I don't have the details on hand, but you can ask in the Slack channel. But I would say for someone who's just getting started, I don't know what your level of comfort is with developing software. Appium is written in Node.js. There are pieces that are written in Java as well. The Android layer is written in Java. And then there's pieces that are written, I believe, in Swift, like WebDriver Agent, which is actually a separate project manager at Facebook. But if you don't do any of those, like I said, the sample code repository is in need of a facelift. So I would love it if people would help out there. And then I know we're about to start a big documentation rework. So if you want to get involved with that, that would be really, really useful. So if no coding experience at all, there's documentation. If you code in your language, be it Ruby, be it whatever, we need sample code for that. So that would be a good way to start. And then also the forum is a good place because people ask questions and they don't always search for previous responses, or there may not be a previous response. So please post things on the forum and get involved that way. And then, yeah, I don't know, go out and do a conference talk too. Spread it to the world. I still go to places and I ask for a show of hands for who knows what Appium is, and I still see a room full of iOS developers, and like only maybe 10 or 20% of them raise their hand. So there's still room to sort of get the word out. So yeah, that'd be what I'd recommend. So hop in on the documentation, hop in on the sample code, and then take a look at the roadmap. And if I can't find a link on the planning meetings, but maybe we can put that in the email. You can hop into those. They're at West Coast friendly times and East Coast friendly times. A little bit less London friendly. But anyway, hop into those and yeah, just listen in and listen to the Slack channel and the discussion group, and that would be what I'd recommend.
All right, that sounds good. Well, Dan, thanks once again for your time today and putting together a really great presentation. We will be sending out some follow-up afterwards, and I know we'll probably have a few webinars to craft. So on behalf of Sauce Labs, Dan, the Appium contributors, and Appium community, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great day, a great rest of your day.
And a great evening for you people in Europe.
There you go.